I'm Neil Murphy. I'm director of Town. We're a small UK developer. I'm going to talk a bit about work in 15-minute neighbourhoods. So Carlos Moreno talked about work being one of the biggest challenges for 15-minute neighbourhoods because of the distance we typically travel to work and the way that the geography of work, but it's also an institutional challenge about how our working lives operate. As The Economist pointed out, it's been far from an age of white-collar liberation, with many people really struggling to work from home, and there's an awful lot of rather kind of speculative predicting going on. And so how do we respond to that? I think that work's often a blind spot in urban practice. As urbanists, we tend to think about good workplaces being always about dense CBDs with wide exchange of knowledge among an innovative milieu and lots of spillover effects versus kind of atomized business park, retail park type of disurbanism. Planning is very focused on controlling use classes, and property investment tends to follow the same pattern. Buildings that are complex in their use or a bit uncertain often tend not to get funded. And of course, architects like to produce, house-proud buildings with a resolved program, and so many, particularly sort of more glamorous workplaces, tend to be, designed with a particular occupier in mind, or certainly with a particular way of working in mind, and specified accordingly. And as a result, workplaces are typically either what Brand would call very high road and resolved and rather sort of highfalutin buildings, or they tend to be kind of no road sheds that really likewise have no clear use beyond what they're initially made for. Low road buildings really, which are in the middle, are about this idea of buildings that can be endlessly and slightly unpredictably adapted and reused to really provide space for creativity to find expression. And I want to suggest that there are three kind of areas that we could think about in relation to the 15-minute neighbourhood in the future. The first is housing fit for home working. I mean, it seems an obvious point really, but for many of us, that the home will continue to be a workplace, or for at least some of the time in the future. And it really needs to catch up. Many homes are very spatially over-programmed, often with more places to wash than to work. Problems that we are already facing with climate change and correctly tightening building standards around acoustic ventilation and overheating will become more acute with more home working. I think that co-housing offers a potential block scale model for community home working. The top left image there is our Marmalade Lane co-housing project in Cambridge, where a room in the common house has been repurposed as a space where people can work in a socially distanced way. And lose some of the kind of chaos and perhaps even loneliness that comes from working at home on your own. And I think the other thing is rediscovering an adaptable housing typology that really can be changed over time. Again, we've become rather poor at that. On the bottom left, there's a rather nice conversion of an old building in Sunderland that's been a house and a workshop at various times, and now does both, and it's endlessly adaptive fabric. The second is local space for social work, trying to replicate the social and economic benefits of agglomeration and proximity in a world in which people are not travelling always to dense CBDs anymore. And that feels to me like it may well be about making space for co-worker support and exchange of ideas outside of individual firms and hierarchies, and instead between people, perhaps fulfilling complementary functions or with shared interests from different hierarchies and organisations, and making sure that we retrofit that into places, particularly sort of tract housing areas where that's been zoned or valued out or put into employment land. And so we need to be looking for adaptable buildings on spare or interstitial plots, and trying to use this as a basis for building a new neighbourhood gravity, often where there isn't any at the moment. And finally, we need to plan for this stuff. At the urban scale, we need to make sure that we're zoning and rezoning to break up housing monoculture and foster unprogrammed activities. Think about low rent, flexible space for work as part of the social infrastructure of neighbourhoods, possibly with a public sector role, and support co-housing and shared amenities, which remains pretty niche. And at the building scale, we need to move away from the idea of permitted development to adaptive reuse, use-blind buildings that can work well for many activities, possibly including housing. We're probably low road for us now is tight shells and loose plans, not necessarily drafty buildings, and we need to pay special attention to light, ventilation and noise attenuation for for a good working environment. Thank you.
As late as February this year, Carlos Moreno identified work as a problem for the 15-minute city, as people's jobs were often at a distance from their homes. But COVID-19 has transformed the landscape of work and shifted home-based work to the mainstream. The positive response from employers and employees alike means that this is now a viable theme for the 15-minute city. Villages have long been hotbeds of home-based work, generally hidden to the passerby, but visible to those with local community knowledge. Some are more or less self-sufficient in terms of anything that needs to be done. The work tucked into the domestic garage, the garden office, the outbuilding, the back extension, the kitchen table, or even the purpose-built work home. Cities, in contrast, systematically designed to separate home from workplace for more than 100 years, are often anonymous places where neighbours do not know each other. Urban home-based work is often, as a result, hidden because people either fear they are or actually are breaking some regulation or other. But it too includes a surprisingly wide range of different occupations, with people squeezing work into home or home into workplace in ways that often causes problems. Architectural and urban strategies are now needed that can contribute to breaking down the old binary paradigm and instead nurture fine-grained mixed-use local microeconomies and the social networks that make them work. Firstly, and maybe most importantly, home-based work needs to be accepted and made legal by removing regulatory obstacles in planning, property taxation, and housing policy. In addition, in order for this not to become an upmarket niche, housing has to get away from profit maximisation and shift to genuine affordability, probably through rent control and a cap on profit on private sector development. Then existing home-based occupations, particularly those that can offer a service in their immediate neighbourhood, need to become visible through signage, people starting to work openly and visibly from the street, local networking apps, or, as already exists for childminders, local registers. Over time, community knowledge will grow. And then workspace needs incrementally to be inserted into residential areas as back, side, front, top floor extensions, garden, offices, studios and workshops, bay windows shops, and also in local institutions in the gym, the supermarket, the school after hours and at weekends, and the library. In addition, recognising that not everyone works on a computer, underused buildings such as garages need to be developed to provide low-cost workshop and studio space. And residential uses need incrementally to be inserted into surplus commercial buildings, not as the minimal, poorly serviced slum housing that has emerged from some PDR schemes, but as work-live spaces for home-based workers whose work doesn't fit into domestic space. London's long history of design for home-based work can offer inspiration. Jane Jacobs' tenets for exuberant vitality in the city still stand. Short blocks, multiple uses in every district, buildings of different ages and affordability, and high density. The most important principle is that one size does not fit all. Small scale, low rise, high density developments with free collective space work best for home-based work. Spatial generosity is really important, and 49% or 50 square meters of workspace should be permitted in any dwelling, whichever's the smallest, as is the case in Japan, with a wide range of spatial proximities between home and work. Agency is crucial, often achieved through flexibility and adaptability. A 2009 Dutch scheme, master planned by MVRDV, encapsulates many of these strategies. New Leiden consists of 360 back-to-back terraced homes built incrementally in blocks of 18 houses on 6 by 15 metre urban plots. 200 are in private ownership, 157 in social housing. Self-build provided agency, and as a result, 80% of the houses include workspaces, offices, workshops, shops, studios, often advertised through modest signage. Primary vehicular roads run east-west. Secondary car-free streets run north-south and provide shared garden space. Home-based work could be an important strategy for the 15-minute city. We need to start to design for it at both urban and architectural scales. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this presentation for the Joint Urban Design Group Academy of Urbanism Symposium on the 15-Minute City. I'm Richard Eastham.
And I'm Jennie Savage. And today we're going to be talking about a village green in Milford-on-Sea in Hampshire, which is in the kind of central south coast of England.
Milford-on-Sea is a village that's got historic origins. You can see just here in this part, this is the historic part of the village. It's grown over the 20th century with a lot of suburban development surrounding that, but it is very much still focused around this village green in the centre of Milford. And we zoom in here, you can see a little bit more closely. There's a main road running on the western edge. The orange roads show how connected it is to its immediate surroundings. And it's got shops and services around it, so right at the heart of the community.
And we were kind of interested in whether we could think about this as being the 15-minute city. And so this idea of the green at the centre with the shops around it, that this actually becomes a model for the 15-minute city. And the way that this village green is now being used makes it a kind of focal point for the community and for people to use. Prior to lockdown, this village green was used for kind of fetes, and there was a carol service at Christmas and various other kind of annual events, but people rarely used to sit on it. And actually during the pandemic and after the sort of initial lockdown, cafes started to reopen and people would come and sit. They'd buy their fish and chips on here, buy their fish and chips and come and sit on the village green, or go to the various cafes and get takeouts. And it became a place where people could kind of socially distance and use the space, but still be outside.
I think it's interesting the way people have decided to use this space. Obviously there's benches and some permanent features here, but it's just a nice big triangular grassy space, and got children playing with parents around and people sitting on the temporary furniture that some of the businesses have put out during the summer. I think some of the choices are interesting. People sitting on the ground. Don't know how this would work as we move into the autumn and winter. This is an interesting bit. This girl decides to sit down here, changes her mind, and actually there's another bit of grass just further up, which is better. So it's great in the summer, but obviously we've got the autumn and winter ahead of us in 2020. I'm not sure what will happen next, really.
But I think, in a way, this kind of like open grassy space is not something that people are going to be able to use when it's pouring with rain or in the middle of winter. But at the same time, it still functions as a kind of space of memory. And so the village kind of projects their memory on this space and also anticipation of the summer to come. So even though it's not being potentially actually used in the winter, it's still serving a community function as a space to kind of think about and project onto and think about what to do there.
And another observation is that the success of the space has been supported through the introduction of temporary furniture, foldable chairs and tables, the picnic benches. There's only a limited number of sort of permanent design features, and they're not great really. There's a lady here with a takeaway coffee right next to a bin at nose level, which could be better positioned. And we've got some teenagers here sort of squished onto a bench for three, which isn't really great. So, I mean, other features around the tree here are really lovely. But it's not been over-designed. It's got some features, but really it's just left to be used as people see fit.
Yeah, and it's just great, this kind of very informal way of running into people, and kind of all the different ways that people are using this space, I think is great. These just encounters that are very natural.
So some quick conclusions. Do spaces like this need landscape architects and urban designers to intervene and improve them? Can they just be left alone to evolve really and be used in different ways?
The other thing was just about this kind of idea that it becomes also a site of memory, and that that's really useful for the community, as well as it being a kind of active site where things can happen.
And I think the final conclusion really is, if this 15-minute city concept that's been talked about this year and is the focus of the symposium does develop, a space of this sort that we find in Milford really will become a glue, or a focal point and a glue for the community that live around it to meet and get to know each other. Thank you very much for listening.